Hello, and welcome to the sixth and final episode of Design Systems Rodeo, Season 1, a podcast that focuses on the more advanced topics of design systems. Today's episode is All Systems Go with guest Kimberly Elam, a faculty member of Ringling School of Art and Design in Sarasota, Florida. Before we bring Kimberly out to the stage, we're going to do a roundup. But this week, rather than talk about certain events that has happened, we're going to talk a shout out to our previous guests. This is Daniel Henderson Eade was on our first episode. His episode was called "Consistently Inconsistent." Then we had Matt Fantastic talking about games and how that applies very well with design systems. And then Ben Callahan talking about culture with Culture Club. Andrew Summers, True Colors, talking about accessibility and different ways to measure that. And then there was Elise Holiday, Deep Impact, how to make it more impactful, a design system. Uh, so our guest, I'm very excited about. It's Her name is Kimberly Elam. She's a writer, an educator, and graphic designer who chairs the Graphic Interactive Communication Department at the Ringling College of Art and Design in Sarasota, Florida. And she has written extensively about graphic design and design education. And her books include Grid Systems, Typographic Systems, and Geometry of Design. And in this episode, All Systems Go, we'll talk about how these principles that she's been studying have are that have been around for such a long time are very core to what design systems are trying to do, and how systems thinking is key to making designs that last. So, with that said, we'd like to welcome Kimberly to the stage.
Hello, Kevin.
Hello. Hi, welcome to the show. I've been a fan for a long time, and I really appreciate you taking the time today. Your research on design could be described as how artists, architects, and designers have leveraged systems, even invisible systems, to create something compelling, lasting works of art. So I have, if I don't have all of your books, I only need to buy maybe one. But I wonder, do you remember when you first became interested in these systems behind the design?
I sure do. First of all, thanks for inviting me to be a part of this Design Systems podcast. And quite some time ago, what really drove a lot of my interest in design systems was jealousy and deep jealousy of the work of some of the mid 20th century Swiss designers. These designers included Armin Hoffman, Joseph Müller-Brockmann, and Emil Ruder. My jealousy ran really deep because I aspired my work to be as good as their work. And quite frankly, it just wasn't. It wanted to be good. It was verging on good, but it wasn't there. So I began to look more closely at the work of these masters because I felt deep inside that they knew things I was just unaware of. Now, I mentioned Joseph Müller-Brockmann, who was a pioneer of the international typographic style and one of the main masters of Swiss design. I'd been a fan of his since my student days, and even more of a fan when I entered professional practice and then design education. The reason for this is I found the way he used white space compelling. His compositions of his posters just always felt right. He mastered abstract elements, which was very intriguing. And I also found the simplicity he used highly appealing. Well, in short, I was smitten, and I desperately wanted my own work to be as beautiful as his. It was this yearning that caused me to look more closely and investigate things I'd never heard of, such as root 2 rectangles, golden section proportions and golden section rectangles and ellipses, ratios, and visual interrelationships. I should say that my graphic design undergraduate education at Parsons School of Design in New York did not include information about proportioning systems. I believe there was one art history course which briefly mentioned that the architecture of the Parthenon in Athens was based on golden section proportions. There were no diagrams. That was all that was said, and it was fairly meaningless to a graphic designer. Well, each step in my research revealed new information and insights, not only into graphic design, but also architecture, fine art, and product design. And it was this research that led to my book, Geometry of Design, and over time served me when I wrote the books, Grid Systems, and later Typographic Systems. Now, in order to show you what I'm talking about, I'd like to show you a few of Mueller Brockman's posters.
Absolutely. I can. You sent me, and I'll actually share so that you can just focus on talking.
That would be perfect. So, in just a moment, Kevin will share his screen. Here we go. Okay. Here are 3 posters, and each one can be visually analyzed, but I'm going to focus on the Beethoven posters, and that's the one on the far right. I'm focusing on this one because it's one of the most dynamic and intriguing. It visually speaks to the drama of the music with a series of rotating circle arcs that surround the information about the content. Can you go back to that
Oh,
first
yes, of
one
course.
for just a moment? Um, it's that drama that I think is so appealing. I mean, those are just circle arcs, but somehow they speak so clearly to music. And now if we could go to the next visual, please. All street posters in Europe are in Route 2 format. And this is a very particular format that, when halved, yields 2 proportional Route 2 rectangles. The Route 2 format is used not only for posters, but also for printed information because it allows the printer to use every single square inch of the page, or square millimeter, as it would be in Europe. If you look at the image on the left, you'll see the diagram of the Route 2 rectangle. And at the top of that diagram, you'll see a square in blue. This is the square of the Route 2 rectangle. And that lands at the center of the circle arcs. Now, if you could shift by looking over to the side, the right side, the center of the circle aligns exactly with the informational body text.
Yes, right here. Yes, I see it.
Mhm. The title Beethoven and all other text aligns to the left and right of a vertical axis, so flush right or flush left. With these axes, everything touches the beginning or ending points of some of the circle arcs.
That's astounding because, obviously no one would know this, intuitively know this yet. There seems to be an idea that you're going to intuitively feel this alignment
Uh,
as a viewer.
as a viewer, you do. Everything feels right.
Mhm.
But the cool thing is it's very knowledgeably and carefully planned. And with this information, it's clear that the placement of the circle and the text are just where they need to be.
Mhm.
That center
There's
point of that first circle that's
right.
on the bottom of the square,
Yeah.
It
It's
didn't
it's like
happen by accident.
yeah, that's exactly what that was the word I was searching for. There's nothing accidental about this layout, but it's stunning to actually see that how carefully it was assembled, how systemically it was assembled.
Oh, this blew me away. And if we could look at the next visual, um, which is even more interesting in that all angles extend from the center of the circle, and they're based on a module of 11.25 degrees. Now, 11.25 degrees is 1/4 of a 45-degree angle. So each 45-degree angle got divided into 4 divisions. The arcs begin and end at these modules, not in between, at the start of each of these modules.
Mhm.
And if you look very closely, the narrowest arc, the tiniest one, nearest the text, nearest the center, that arc occupies 5 modules. The next largest arc occupies 6 modules, next larger one, 7 modules. And then from there, it's a little difficult to follow the remainder of the arcs as they are cropped by the edge of the poster. But the point that is important here is those arc lengths were not intuitive. They were very carefully planned. Now let's take a look at the width of the arcs.
Okay.
Okay, the width of the circle arcs vary from 1 unit to 32 units. And Kevin, I think the next slide shows that maybe just a little bit better. Okay, here we go. The narrowest circle arc we'll call 1 unit. The next narrowest circle arc is 2 units in width, then 4, then 8, then 16, and 32. So it's a doubling progression in terms of how the widths of the arcs were planned. The broadest arc is 32 units, and it's only hinted at with the segment division in the upper right-hand corner of the poster. And if you look very carefully at the upper right-hand corner, you will
Ah,
see a little line. And
mhm.
that's one of my favorite details of the poster. He's giving us a hint. Um, and he didn't need to, because most viewers would be just accepting of what was going on. But we designers, well, that little arc or that little hint just warms our hearts, because now we know that doubling progression was indeed there. So in summary,
The thing I wanted to mention about this is that, as soon as you draw this, it becomes really super obvious. I'm wondering, did anyone actually communicate this in, let's say, language? Or did they just simply drop little hints like this and just sort of figured someone would be delighted to discover that this actually was all put together from a single thought process?
well, Mueller Brockman's son wrote a book about his work. And he did show a diagram for this poster that looks absolutely nothing like my diagram and is impossible to follow, but it made good sense to Mueller Brockman.
Hmm.
And that's what gave me the first hint that, something more was going on here. But strangely enough, the Swiss masters never really talked, except in the most arcane way, about proportioning systems, because they felt everybody knew it. Uh, because education in Europe was very École de Beaux-Arts based, uh, very based on the work of the masters and their use in proportioning systems and those kinds of things. And it was just kind of common knowledge.
Hmm.
Uh, but here in the United States, even though we brought over the Bauhaus masters that began truly design education in the United States, they never really wrote clearly about it. And I've really looked at the work of Mies van der Rohe, Corbusier, um, the architects, and many others, and they kind of hint at it, but it's almost as if they either think, oh, you already know that, or they're kind of keeping the secret to themselves. I'm not sure what it is, and maybe it's a mix of both of those.
Sure.
Now, going back to Mueller-Brockman's poster, as a conceptual work, the geometric rhythms of the concentric circles relate directly to mathematical systems and structures in music. As a structured work of design, every element has a reason for its scale, placement, and position. Now, knowing this radically changed the way I designed. I'd been very much an intuitive designer that kind of hoped for the best in terms of my scale and placement of elements in any given design. And I was transformed into a knowledgeable designer, whereby each decision logically progressed from the previous decision.
Right.
And it made just a world of difference. And what I'd encourage the listeners to do is, just like the Swiss international style intrigued me, everybody has something that they're squirreling away, either on Pinterest or in some other site, because it intrigues them, and they admire it, they don't quite understand it, and they're kind of itching to do it themselves. If you have that feeling, go ahead and look a little closer. I don't know what you'll find,
Hmm.
um, but you'll definitely raise your work radically if you can kind of begin to figure that out. And even when you have to hold on to ideas for a period of time, eventually you always get an opportunity to try them.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, let's see. The one question that sort of springs to mind from a design systems perspective um, is that we attempt to codify a lot of good design principles, or and put those design principles into the form of a brand, a certain look and a feel. And some people sort of rebel against that idea of standards and patterns as expressed within a design system, because it would take away their creative freedom. And I've encountered that quite a lot. And I'm wondering, you as an educator, what do you, how would you respond to that?
Well, what you're asking is it advantageous to approach design from a more structured or even mathematical perspective?
Mm,
Um, and when we discuss restrictions, I'm really reminded of my experience as a design educator. First of all, I'm really fortunate. The design classroom is an awesome research laboratory. And as an educator, I very quickly learned that the absolute surest way for students to miserably fail beyond all comprehension is to assign a project without rules, without restrictions, without constraints. And the reason for this is that students immediately get stuck, and they get stuck with decision making. The world of design is just too expansive and broad for them to handle. They need a way to think about it. Students want to be successful, but the options are so numerous that they don't know where to start. And because of this, I first became interested in design systems when teaching a basic typography course. At that time, the grid system was the only design system that was taught to student designers, including myself. My education was all grids.
mhm.
Um, and it's a great way, even today, to start with students. I approached the subject with traditional methods, and I explained how the grids worked, and of course showed examples in newspapers, magazines, and posters. Now, we're talking some time ago, um, in the non-digital age.
Hmm.
And with the fundamentals covered, I assigned a simple project. And when students showed me the results, I was absolutely shocked by the miserable results. I couldn't believe it. And I started questioning my worth as a design educator.
Oh.
What they did is students used decorative fonts, totally inappropriate to the content. Rather, those fonts serve their aesthetic sensibilities of novelty for some reason or another.
Hmm.
The scale of the fonts used was haphazard, wildly large. They felt like they had to fill the entire format with something. Why, I'm not quite sure, but I think the idea was more is better. Students paid little attention to the typographic nuances of leading, kerning, hierarchy, and the compositions were at the very best awkward. These awful results weren't awful because the students were inept, but rather because the instructor, and that's on me, hadn't focused the project enough for the students. I realized that I had to change my approach towards grid systems, and I have to credit Joseph Mueller-Brockman's book titled Grid Systems with providing me with an approach that, even though I changed it, enabled me to teach students to truly understand the grid systems. And the work improved radically. Earlier, I mentioned my book, Grid Systems,
Yeah.
and this book is more about methodology and process than anything else. I've found that when I can teach students how to logically think about grid systems, they can do it remarkably well.
Hmm.
The reason the project works so well is that it's very tightly restrained, or my project works so well, is it's very tightly restrained to one font, one size of type, and a simple 3-column grid. This causes the student to be focused on creativity within those boundaries. And because of it, they do remarkable things, and remarkable things with the nuances in type. Now, let me show you just a few examples of how this works.
Sure.
Here's what the student has to work with: one font, one weight, and a 3-column grid. There's also what I call a wildcard element, which is a small circle that can be placed anywhere in the composition to focus attention or become a pivot point. Now, within this system, there are variables. The type can be placed anywhere in the grid, but the type must align either left or right to the grid lines. Lines of text can be broken in any way that makes sense. And finally, type can be leaded as desired, from overlapping or very tight to wide and airy. In the next slide, you'll notice a small square with an arrangement of rectangles that correspond to the columns. This grid system works because all the elements are in proportion to each other. In terms of line lengths, lines fit 1 column or 2 columns or 3 columns. It's done in a square format, and the square is a neutral format. Rather, and the viewer focuses on the interior of a square rather on the length to width proportion. I use squares a lot in my teaching. When the lines of type are grouped and arranged, the white spaces are interesting and the alignments are compositionally cohesive. Now I'd like to show some advanced student work from my book, Typographic Systems. These compositions explore non-traditional visual organizational systems. And students are given more options. So this is an advanced group. The
Mhm.
options include color. They're still restricted to black, but they can use tones of black, white, and red. And they can also use tones of red within the colors. And they can also use non-objective geometric elements. And these include any geometric element, or it can even be an organic element. The only thing that the geometric or non-objective elements must do is they must emphasize or organize or focus attention. Okay. The composition on the left is the axial system. And this is one of the simplest systems, as all elements are arranged either to the left or right of an axis. It's a branching system like a tree trunk, and branches come out of the left or right, similar to the trunks of trees. Groups of type are separated by changes in color, which also indicates a hierarchy or order of importance. And the compositions on the right investigate the radial system. Now, the radial system is kind of funky. All elements are arranged to extend from a central point like rays of the sun or fireworks. This is a really difficult system to control because depending on the orientation of lines, readability may be diminished. Again, color changes help to order the groups of type, and the bottom composition elements with textures of type and negative leading. And it works remarkably well. Now, granted, probably only for short messages, but it's a fascinating system that I don't think gets used quite enough.
Mhm.
The next two systems in the next slide are the dilatational system on the left and the transitional system on the right. The dilatational system involves circles that expand from a central point, sort of like having your eyes dilated or dropping a pebble into still water and the waves move out. Again, this system is problematic to control because the text leaves the traditional horizontal, but it yields a rhythm that is really intriguing. The transitional system is an informal system, and that's on the right of the slide.
Mhm.
And this system is a system of layered and shifted banding where horizontal lines of text, okay, move at free will to the left and right within the format.
This seems the most random and least systemic of anything you've shown.
Yeah, but it's also the most beautiful. It's almost like fine art.
It really
And
it's there's something to it. Yeah.
yeah, and the interesting thing about it is, and I'm only showing two examples in the book. There are dozens, but they all, particularly with the circle, and I didn't think of this at the beginning, but the circle almost makes these landscape paintings
Mm.
in a certain way, which is kind of an interesting idea.
Mhm.
Um, But if you look at them closely, there are no interrelationships along an axis or edge alignments as these elements move freely. And the lines of type are free flowing with the textures and colors assisting in ordering the message. Let's see now, if we could look next at the modular and bilateral systems. The modular system is dependent on a frame or a unit that acts as a ground to contain the text. And you'll see that on the left of the slide. Typographic words or lines have a distinctly individual form that defies standardization, and the module creates rhythm and order. A simple way to do this is to use a rectangle that spans the width of the format, as in the small top example on the left. Attention is brought to the circle that contains the word free. For some reason, students always emphasize the word free, maybe because they're on tight budgets while they're in school, but free usually gets the top hierarchy in many compositions. But it's hierarchically the most important because it's overlapping two modules, and there's a thin red rule behind it. In this way, the color and shape draw the viewer's attention. Likewise, in the bottom example, color and placement in the top left square create a hierarchy and a starting point with the word architectonic. Your eye just has to go there.
Mm-hmm.
The most important words in the composition appear in black on a gray field, and the less important dates are in outlined squares.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's look to the right at the bilateral system. And before I started doing this, I thought, oh, bilateral, this is going to be the most boring system in the world, because the bilateral system is the most symmetrical, and it uses a single axis with lines that are centered on the axis. However, my wonderful students create ways to achieve asymmetry. In this small composition, a gray rectangle comes in from the left and disrupts the symmetry of the text, creates visual interest, and of course, a hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
making that composition much more interesting as an asymmetric composition. In the large composition at the bottom, it's a little bit more experimental, with all lines of text sort of jammed together at the top. Changes in the color of the text separate the tight block into two sections, separated by the title in a different color, and the circle, which is supposed to be small. Well, this student decided to do it differently. The circle has been greatly enlarged, cropped, and outlined to provide symmetry. And I applaud the students that create these kinds of really interesting changes in a system.
And that's the interesting part, is that you gave them a system, and they found ways to bend it to their will.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That is so wonderful.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm so sorry we're out of time. We could probably do this for another 2 hours.
Oh dear.
I know.
Oh dear.
But
I'm really sorry to hear that.
me too.
Thanks for letting me share some of the work. And if your viewers are interested, my Behance site, which is behance.net/KELAM, can see more work and more information, both from my personal writing and my teaching.
We will put a link to that when we post this on YouTube. It's always worth it to dive deeper into the research and studies that you've put together. Really impressive. Well, I think that is we're going to have to call it. We're just a little over time. It's not a biggest of deals. And once again, thanks to all the guests that have been on, and a special call out to my boss, Tina Nixon, who is a very deep systems thinker and a very, very inspiring to me, and allows me to spend some time putting things like this together and getting to meet people who are my heroes. Oh, Caroline is here. Great. I know her. Anyway, thank you so much. We're going to close it. That's the end of a season 1 Design System Rodeo. Appreciate it very much.
Oh, thanks so much, Kevin.